As you know, there were 5 of us, Brian McSweeney and Rachel Ebke, Atma Jyoti, and Dambara came from Oregon to sing. And all 5 of us, plus our New Zealand host Kavita and Brian and Linda Rose and others of the friends that we met, were absolutely, completely engaged the entire time. This was a wholly new experience for me, and Brian and I have traveled in India extensively, and he traveled with Swamiji a great deal for a number of years before that, the last 4 years or so of Swami's life. But Brian and I were comparing notes that this was the first time that we were in a place where Ananda simply doesn't exist. And in India, when we travel, we were still going from, even however embryonic, we were going from center to center, from place to place, from devotees to devotees. Here we were just in a place where there was absolutely nothing on the ground. It was greatly compensated for by the fact that New Zealand is a marvelously Western country. After coming back and reflecting on it, I came up with it that it has the feeling a little bit of the United States Midwest, sort of what I would imagine, because I've never lived there, but the little I've traveled through Indiana and Illinois and those places, where life is a little simpler, a little less avid than it is here, but there's still a feeling of California because it's forward-looking, it's expansive, it's health-oriented, it's probably the healthiest place we have ever been. All the water, food, air, gluten-free, just everything was, the New Zealanders are very health conscious, and their country is just very vibrant. So except for Brian, who was a little down for about 2 days, none of us had even a sniffle the whole trip, which is really impressive considering that we were living very close together and working very hard. But I think it was just a factor of how healthy everything was there. This trip was, as most of you know from the letter, I wrote a long letter just before I left. This trip was just kind of an idea that was born on the basis of my trying to feel what it is that Swamiji wants me to do next. And as you well know, he assigned me a more global responsibility without giving me the ability to speak any language but English. And without giving me any more patience about being translated than I have ever had. I mean, picture me being translated, it's really no fun. I stand there and fume while I'm being translated and watch all my ideas go out the window and then search for others. So the English-speaking world seems to be my world. The concept of South Africa is hovering in the back, and Australia and New Zealand were right there in the front. Swamiji made an effort to start a community in Australia, which we abandoned, actually. It was into the 90s before he finally accepted that it wasn't going to work. And when I set out on this journey, I thought, when I set out to set this up, I thought it was Australia. But Australia just didn't come through in any way, and New Zealand was where the energy was. Primarily one wonderful devotee, Kavita Parshottam, whom you all met, many of you met, because she came through here. She proved to be, everything that we felt her to be. I mean, a real soul sister, a deep devotee of Master, just with a very clear inner sense that her life is to serve Master. And our coming there was entirely the result of her determination, and the success of our trip was because of that clarity of purpose that she put through. We arrived, we sort of rendezvoused. We were all flying, mostly flying on mileage tickets, so our schedules were a little staggered. Dambara arrived 5 days ahead of time. Brian and Rachel arrived a few days ahead of time. They touristed around. They rented a little motor thing, this little tiny green thing. The brand is Juicy for some reason. And so they tootled around the North Island. So by the time we got there, they had a pretty good sense of where everything was and what things were like. And then we all just rendezvoused at the Auckland airport and then went to Kavita's home. We had no expectation. I had no idea what kind of a place she lives in. They were gifted really by God, this extraordinary home that is on, the property is probably the length of our whole community. And it literally faces right on the Waikato River. And the house is a very large house with 6 or 7 bedrooms. It used to be the post office in another small town. They're big at picking up buildings and moving them in that country. So some time ago, that building was picked up and moved. And so it's built with a big porch and these great big rooms, and it sets right on the river like that. And she has 2 daughters, 2 teenage daughters, and her dear husband, Arun Parshottam. Arun is a mathematician and an ecologist, and he works for the university on ecology issues for the country. And they just managed to rearrange their house, which included Kavita and Arun making their bedroom out of this living room. And so we all got to stay in the house together. The 2 girls moved in together, so we all had our own rooms, and we were able to live there. And we just pull into this place, and all of a sudden we're at this spacious it felt like a spacious old farmhouse, looking across this green land to the Waikato River. And then this huge expanse of green with orchards and gardens that Arun is taking care of on the side. And so that was our home base. So it was not a hardship assignment. Exactly.
Except for a few things.
Except for a few things. She could. But it was, we were very comfortable, and we came and went. That's Hamilton, New Zealand. It's a couple of hours south of Auckland. New Zealand is 2 skinny islands, and there's the North and the South Island. We were entirely in the North. Auckland is the North piece, and there's a whole bunch of what they call the upper lands, which are above it. But Auckland is the very largest city where I think 1/3 of the country lives. And Wellington is down just at the end of the North Island. Then you have to cross the water to get to the South Island. Christchurch and other cities are in the South Island. We wanted to go to the South Island, but the logistics of moving all of us Kavita and I gave it up before we went. It was just too hard. But we went from Auckland to Wellington. And we had rented a big 12-person van, which was a big square white box, which we called the Marshmallow. And fortunately, Brian had learned to drive on the left side in India. So he just took over the driving, and Rachel and Brian joked that what did they do on the trip? And the answer was they knew how to look things up on Google. Because they had you need a coffee shop, they found a coffee shop. You need to know this address, they had the GPS, and they just led us flawlessly. Kavita's about as helpless in that respect as I was, so her being a native was of no value. Brian was our navigator the whole way. Because we were just going into places where there was no Ananda, we had to make everything happen ourselves. Prior to going there, we decided to order a lot of books from India. So we ordered about $3,000 worth of books. That was rupee price doubled because of the shipping. And, we looked at it, David looked at it, rookie tour mistake is always to order 10 times more books than you need. And, he sort of looked at it, and we kind of looked at each other, whether this is the classic rookie mistake where you're going to be hauling these books all around and then bringing them home again. But one of the things that happened on this trip, and this is a factor of the more inward side of it, is we sold almost all the books we brought with us. And it was one of the ways in which people were expressing to us their seriousness about this trip. And we ordered almost all of the major books and made mistakes, could have ordered more of the Gita, more of the Patanjali book, and a few others. We just had to try to guess what people would be interested in. And we did ship in a lot of 3 extra cases of the blue autobiography of a yogi. Because Kavita's been giving it away for years, and I just couldn't bear that she was giving away the orange one. So I had to bring her the blue one, although we've now made arrangements to keep bringing books in. So we had all the books. We had, some of you had seen, we had pictures of the masters made in metal, like the one that's back there. This is our great new innovation for traveling altars, is you can make them out of metal. And so they're lightweight. You don't have the glass frames that break. You get these little plastic stands for them, and then you just put them in a bag and carry them everywhere. And we also had the sense, God had the sense to send Atmajoti, who, as you all know, is the master of making altars. So everywhere we went, this was not anything that we thought out. Really, truthfully, the team was put together by God. Because I hadn't really, it's just not what I think of. I hadn't thought about how ugly these bare rooms are and how little that expresses our spirit and what it takes to really make a room beautiful. And immediately Atmajyoti just tuned right into that and had the sense to bring altar cloths and things with her. So everywhere we went, whether we just set up Swami and Master's picture or gradually as we started setting up all the Masters, she always made it look lovely. And she was climbing down the hill at where we were living. There were irises blooming eventually, and then these lilies down by the river. Down the steep slope, she climbs down and cuts all these lilies, which caused Arun to say, "Are those valuable?" And then, then he started selling them over the internet. So she was responsible for a small cottage industry getting started, there.
He hadn't been selling them before?
No, he hadn't really, they're just growing wild down there. Everything is so, well, yeah, it was adorable. I mean, and it was way down the hill, and it was the sheep pasture. When they bought that property, they inherited a sheep. Everybody has a sheep. They had one sheep called Shrek. And the Shrek lived right next to the grapefruit, the orange, and the lemon trees, and Shrek had a passion for citrus. And when you go out there to pick any of that citrus, Shrek would come up and start sort of shrieking at you until you started feeding her lemons and things. So it was in Shrek's little pasture where the lilies were. I'm just going to skip around. Oftentimes when I try to explain people why a new avatar has to come, I talk about how the avatar talks to the people of the times. Most of you have heard me say this. And how Jesus's examples, were for the times. And one that always works in California and India is if your sheep falls into a ditch on the Sabbath. And to almost everyone I can say, you don't have sheep, do you? I actually got that far. You don't have sheep. Everybody in New Zealand has a sheep. And if you don't have your own sheep, then your neighbor has put his sheep on your land. I mean, it's just, and then I was caught just completely. It's never happened before. Now, it's completely trivial, but it was, pardon me?
But do they fall into ditches?
Ditches, they do. There are plenty of ditches. But for me, the adventure of the whole thing, it was really fun because it's not America. They're not Americans. They're English speaking, but they're not Americans. If anything, they're a little more British. We had been warned. Many of you know Roderick. What's Roderick's last name? Anderson. Roderick Anderson is a native-born New Zealander. He lives up in Ananda Village, and he actually gave us a list of advice. When you go, these are the things you should think about. One thing he did say is that New Zealanders are more British than American, which means they're more reserved. They're just not as inclined as Americans are. I mean, that was one small thing which I wrote to you several times. I set up my classes for conversation and interaction, of which there wasn't a lot, even though people were taking it in very seriously, but they just weren't inclined to share in public. It took me till the last day of the last program to do the most obvious thing in the world, which was have people write down their questions. As soon as I asked people to write down their questions, because I knew for a fact, I mean, I'm introducing, very unusual ideas to these people, and I knew that they were very interested and wanted to hear it, but it just isn't in the culture to be able to, you take these things for granted, that people are all more or less the same, but they're not. And they have these orientations. For me, this whole journey was, it was multifold. So let me start in a certain place. It's like we've had a lot of years with Swamiji and have watched him do lots of different things. And my concept of the spiritual path is to replicate in my own life in my own small way as many things as possible that Swamiji has done. And Swamiji's entire life purpose was always to tell people about Master's teaching. And we can expand that into the way of life that is Ananda, to tell people about Swamiji, to give them an opportunity to learn this path, learn these books. It was an amazing experience to be so close to the first time with so many people. New Zealand is not spiritually unsophisticated. A lot of teachers pass through there. It's just, there's an interest. There's ashrams there, people have ashrams, and a lot of Indian teachers go through New Zealand because it's an awake, interesting place. Master is not particularly well known there. SRF has a few centers, and every 4 years, 2 monks come for 3 days. And they do a public program on Friday night. On Saturday it's for the members, and on Sunday they do a Kriya initiation. And they get about 200 people, I was told, for the public lecture, and then about 100 for the other program. So that tells you it's not a huge force there, but it's there. And Autobiography of a Yogi is available, and many people have read it. But still, Master is relatively speaking unknown. I mean, this is the result of SRF's less expansive approach to spreading the teachings. They have a very set policy that only the monks and nuns are allowed to teach. So even if somebody becomes very deeply involved, if they're not a monastic, trained at the centers, and the centers are either in America or in India, they can't pick up the ball and run with it. They can have their meditation groups, but if the meditation group meets in a private home, they also have a policy that they're not allowed to publicize it. And I don't know why, but that's the policy as I understood it. Kavita had been through in SRF, and Brian and Linda Rose had been in SRF, and a few other people. The question of SRF never came up as a public issue, but it was a constant conversation with our hosts because they were experiencing this, the difference. But as a result of that, even though SRF has been coming to New Zealand for a very long time, I actually verified that Swami Kriyananda went to the Auckland SRF group in 1958. Wow. I had thought that that was true, but Brian Rose, who's an incredible student of detailed history, he had the reference. He knew exactly. And that's what I'd believed to be true, but Swami never went after Ananda. He set a trip. At one point, I organized a 21-day trip for him when he was in Australia, but his health wasn't good. And in the end, we canceled the whole trip, so he never went. But as a result, even when people are connected, if they were connected through SRF, not much could happen from that. There wasn't a lot of carrying the torch. Everybody who loves Master gives out the Autobiography of a Yogi and talks about it, but still, it was hard for it to really find a vortex of energy. So our going in the way that we went in, which was, I guess, we were there 5 or 6 weeks, and we were in Auckland, we were in Hamilton, we were in a town called Palmerston North, and we were in Wellington. Palmerston North is where Kavita used to live, where her parents live, where the SRF group where she started with Master is, and just there was a core there, because when you're just starting from scratch, you've got to have contacts. It's very difficult to do it without any contacts. But to be there that long and to go all across the North Island as we did, and then to do our programs the way we did, everybody goes to their default. My default is curriculum, is how I put it, and the idea that people will be interested in subjects. So we made, especially on the weekends, we just packed. Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. Saturday night we showed the Finding Happiness movie. Sunday morning we had a Sunday service. Sunday afternoon we had an introduction to Kriya Yoga. Wow. So the idea of that was that people would come in and out. Sunday service is free, Friday night is free, the movie is free, the classes cost. It all worked out. Financially it actually came out. We certainly didn't make money, and we did spend money, but it wasn't a colossal. It washed out just about where we wanted it to. And what we were doing is we were just providing all these different doorways for people to come in. The classic, death and dying, karma and reincarnation, the chakras, relationships, a few others like that. We had about 7 topics that we just rotated in and out. And Kavita herself has been teaching. She managed always to never quite violate the SRF restrictions, but she pushed it pretty much to the edge. About 6 or 7 years ago, she just felt that she had to serve Master or die, is basically. She just felt she was born to serve Master and she was going to find a way. She's a Hatha yogi, so she teaches Hatha yoga, she teaches meditation. She sort of would teach around a little bit Master's teaching, but she would teach Patanjali from the Gita. She's very active in the New Zealand Yoga Teacher Association. She's a tutor for people being certified as yoga teachers, which is she's very, very active. And especially we're in her town. She has a very, broad group, many dozens of people that she's brought pretty far. And Hamilton was really, of course, our best city. And when I go back, that's where we'll concentrate, because she has a really broad reach. She's done really good work there. But still, she has not really stood up and said, I am a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda and this is the path of Kriya. Partly because of the SRF hesitation, her just not quite knowing exactly how to do it. I think she felt confident in herself. I know she felt confident in herself, but just wasn't sure. I mean, of course, this trip changed all that, so she's really quite strong now in what she's doing. And also Brian Rose in Wellington and Linda, his wife, are also, starting Ananda down there. But what we were doing was really bringing this particular path of self-realization to people who essentially did not know it, even if they read Autobiography of a Yogi. Because even if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, you don't really know. And with all due respect, even if you've read the SRF lessons, you don't really know. Because Swamiji's way of giving it to us just, takes this, and it just makes it so enormous. And if you can articulate, anything of these teachings, and, I have the gift of articulation, but if you can articulate it at all, it's just a revolution. People struggle with so much about what is karma, what are the chakras, what is really right behavior. I was saying to David, I did a certain amount of individual counseling, not a huge amount, but some. But people bring you, and they're very sincere. They really want to do the right thing. They want to do God's will. They want to make their karma correct. But it's very hard to know, because there's so much teaching that's so garbled. You have to stand up for your rights. You have to set your own boundaries. You have to, make sure that no one's taking advantage of you. And then it just, what is karma? What is dharma? It's totally confused. And there's just no straight line. And, just sitting with people, many different people, and just doing what Swamiji has taught us how to do, which is just to really find where the thread of truth is in all of the possibilities spinning around in someone's mind. It's revolutionary. Just as simple as that. When I had the stack of questions for the last afternoon, they just were wide-ranging. What is mental illness? How do you know what your dharma is? What about people who are suicide bombers? Just everything that bothers everybody. There's an answer. And it's not a you've got to believe kind of answer. It's Swamiji's way of just bringing everything down. I heard Swami say on a tape recently, unless he can take a truth and bring it to a concrete example that anyone can understand, he doesn't feel himself that he's fully understood it. And if you think about his teaching, that's what he does. And he talks about how so much writing, it sounds good, but it's never drawn down to what do I actually do about it. And all of our teaching is what do I actually do about it. And what was so marvelous on this, which again, it wasn't like I really thought any of this out, but Divine Mother had much better plans than I did, is that the five of us were quite a diverse little band, I know she doesn't mind my saying, but Aunt Majoti comes disguised as a little old lady. And lots of little old ladies come to these things, and they always just saw her and just went right over to her. They saw in her a kindred spirit. Brian is a 20-something, and I always say he always looks like the videographer from California. He just plays his part perfectly. He's always, just a slightly trendy in his little V-neck shirts, his little muffler, he just always like this little hoodie. He looks perfect. Yeah, red shoelaces, just perfect. When we were in India, sometimes he would, ask if he was dressed appropriately. I said, "You look like the videographer from California, from Los Angeles. You're just perfect. You don't ever have to change your clothes." So he moved around with that, and Rachel is just elegant and interesting, and just has so much heart and enthusiasm for everything. And Dambara, you all know Dambara, he's just so personable and always upbeat, ready with a joke, and just gives himself to anybody in the room. And of course, sang like an angel. But as soon as I stopped talking, the whole room would divide up, And of course, Kavita was the local. Kavita was the one they could go to and sort of say, "Are they really like this? Like, what's really going on here?" And she could reassure them, But it was a real group effort. I did, of course, most of the classes. Dambara did all the music. But after that, and there was a lot of after that, every single one of us was really playing the part of master spokesman. And it was, and I know that Aunt Majoti can speak to this more than I can, but even for Brian, who's done a lot of this, it was very different because there was no one else. We were completely it. And the whole possibility of what this spiritual path could be for people was personified in us. And then you also find out, and this is how it's such a marvelous experience, you really appreciate what you have. This has been, from my point of view, the great gift of my whole life, is that I've always been in a position to introduce people to this teaching. And so I have never forgotten, I believe that is the truth, I have never forgotten, I don't think even for a minute, what a privilege this path is. And how unusual. One doesn't like to make comparisons. It's not necessary to make comparisons, but let us just say, what we have is so practical. And the answers are just so solid. We had several sessions on death and dying, and I think in a couple of cases, it was very interesting to me because even though people wouldn't say that much, they just didn't want to share in front of each other, is what I observed. It's not the culture for them to do so. It's not really like in private people were as emotive and expressive as ever, but in public people are just a little more reserved. But people gave me a lot with their eyes. And so I was having, in some ways more than usual, I was having a lot of, in the middle of the classes, conversations with people who were just really understanding things, and significantly especially on the death and dying ones. And a little bit when we were talking about love and relationships. But just people were shifting. You never know, and you don't want to, well, actually you do want to be entirely optimistic. But there was such a feeling of having made such a difference in so many people's lives. We initiated, I think, 5 people as disciples for the first time. And we initiated 4 people into Kriya. We were going to initiate a 5th one who was extremely qualified, but he actually lives in Thailand and his wife became sick, and so he wasn't able. He was going to come to Auckland, and he wasn't able to do it. 3 of them were part of the SRF group in Palmerston North. But for various reasons, their ability, first of all, they have to wait 4 years, but also their ability to go where the monks were was not easy. One of them was qualified through YSS and 2 of them through the SRF lessons. We did the initiation in a private home in the living room of this man's house where they've been living for decades. It was a completely different setting than any initiation you would ever do. I look back over the life that God has taken me through, and you see how pieces fit together. In 1982, David and I were married in January, and in May we went off with Swamiji on a 6-week lecture tour of Europe. That was our honeymoon. We took our honeymoon with Swami. And we went through Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Italy. Right, we did Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. I suppose that's what it was. And Swami gave Kriya, David remembers, 6 times. And he gave it just like that. We didn't have any temples. He wasn't going to go rent something. We didn't have any money. So we just converted somebody's living room into the place. And I think I wrote this in a letter. I remember with Maya, Devi, and Helmut in Frankfurt, making Babaji drink in her parents' kitchen, and then we had the initiation, as I recall, right in the living room. And so I sort of knew that that was an option. I didn't have any questions about whether or not in such circumstances this was an appropriate thing to do. I also knew intuitively how, you have to shift things a little bit. You're not going to see someone for another year or two. You have to, qualification becomes a little different. Their access to training is a little different. So we did that Kriya in Palmerston North, which it was not easy to do. And then there was a fourth Kriyaban in the room, who was the mother of the woman who was YSS. She'd been a Kriyaban for 28 years. She didn't speak English, of course. So having her right in the front, not understanding anything I was saying, just added a certain dimension to the whole experience. I felt afterwards, if I could give Kriya to those people, I can give Kriya to anyone. But it was very, very inspiring. Just extremely so, deeply so. And it was made more complicated just in the way these things are. The couple who lived in the house was elderly, and the woman is declining in her health, and she has caregivers who come to take care of her. Well, they come to prepare her for bed prior to the time of the Kriya initiation. So she was in her pajamas and her robe for the whole Kriya initiation. But it was so sweet. We took a photograph of all the Kriyabans. We actually took it down afterwards when we realized that she was wearing her pajamas, because she's been a disciple for decades, and we just decided it wasn't appropriate. But for us, it was all just, this is like, it took all the formality out of everything, and it just made us realize this is just between the devotee and God. I don't just mean Kriya, but all of it. All of it is just between the devotee and God, and everything else that you build up is just extra. Rachel commented that she has been to every Kriya that's been given at Ananda since she came there, because she's been part of the team. And she said it had become a lot about the list of things you have to do to set up. And then just suddenly having it be so impossible to even pull out the list, much less to follow it. It just puts you right down to what this path really is. The last Kriya we gave was, the last weekend we were there, we all went to a retreat center at Lake Taupo, and this woman came from Australia, and she told me that I told her that I would initiate her into Kriya. I had to honestly admit that I didn't remember that, but in fact, when we talked, she was well qualified. She had studied through Ananda. She was part of the online courses. She'd come all the way from Australia for this. It didn't fit into the weekend program, so she actually came back to a hotel in Hamilton, and on Tuesday morning before we left, Brian and Kavita and I just went to her hotel room. We carried the masters in, and just there was a little shelf by the window. We just set the masters up, and we had a one-person Kriya initiation. Just sitting on the floor next to her bed, between the closet and the telephone, and it was amazing. Just once again, there you are. Okay, this is really what it's about, and it's so important for us not ever to lose track of that, even for just 1 second, because naturally you want things to be a certain way, and so you start thinking that the way they need to be has anything to do with what you're really doing. It's a very fine line. So it was in that respect. From another angle, many years ago when Swamiji was meeting with a group of colony leaders, I can't remember what prompted the discussion, but we were in a car, a few of us, and Swamiji was giving advice about being a colony leader, and this was the point he was making. He said, it's presumptuous not to take your own spiritual welfare into account in the enacting of your responsibilities. What he meant by that is, merely because you have a position, you can't pretend that you have nothing to learn. You have to behave in a way that's also good for you. And that's part of where there is dharma, there is victory. And then he used as the example, if, for example, a very stern decision is required, the appropriate decision would be a stern one, is what he said. But being stern like that would not be good for you. He said, make a charitable decision instead. Isn't that interesting? Because you can't take yourself out of the equation. To do so, well, you can extrapolate what happens when people begin to do that. They become more conscious of their position, and they lose touch with their own reality. I mean, Swamiji was so brilliant in so many millions of ways, and that particular statement being one of them. Well, it was interesting for me because I, of course, have, a long distance to go. None of us are there. And so, why am I in New Zealand becomes a question. I mean, just being on tour is not so difficult for me. I realized Dambara had never been on a tour. Just all of the years he was at Ananda, he gave me all the reasons, all the trips he missed. Rachel and Atmajoti were new. Brian and I were old hands at this. And just traveling like that is, somehow it's natural to me. And it's a good sadhana, though, to be wherever you are. It's very, very important to just be wherever you are. I mean, so much of our lives, our consciousness is divided. You don't have to leave home to have a divided consciousness. You're at work, you want to be at home. You're away from the people you want to be with, and you're half with them. And we're just always, 1/3 or 2/3 of ourself anywhere. So just being completely away from home and just having to settle what I call home, I try to call this California. Just to be wherever you are and consider that that's where you live. That's a very, very important sadhana, to be able to sleep comfortably, to be able to meditate no matter where you're sitting, to just feel like yourself and not feel inhibited by anything that's going on around you, to be in other cultures and have the intuition. And for me, to be in a culture that was more familiar than India, but less, it just wasn't the same culture. With people I just didn't know. I just didn't know anything about anybody, really, except just one or two. And partly because of confusion, I didn't really get a clear enough idea from Kavita when I started, sort of who was in the room. And then just have to just go by pure intuition, which, I probably had about a 51% batting average on it. I think I did more good than harm fairly steadily. But still, it was, I knew why I was there. This was not like just for them. This was also for each of us has to find whatever edge that is that we don't know. And that's why Swamiji sent me out on this. I mean, you can obviously say that it's good for Ananda and it's nice for Master's work, but it's presumptuous not to take yourself into account. So I was always very attentively trying to hear, why I was there and what I could do to be more part of that. And really, I have to say honestly, I didn't gauge things correctly. It took about half the tour before, and even just writing out questions didn't even occur to me to the very, very end. And how much devotion, how much music, how much about the Masters. I never spoke without Swamiji and Master's picture. At the beginning, that's what I did, and I think that was the right decision. Because, we're not really wanting people to feel that they have to embrace the entire thing before they can listen to a lecture about karma. I would rather have people feel, hey, what else is going on here? Than this is too much. And I'm going to get confused by it. At the same time, it's just folly for me to pretend that I'm just representing myself. And all these modern teachers, they just stand up and represent themselves. And I think, wow, if you feel comfortable doing that, go ahead. But I sure don't. I just think it's just not honest. There just has to be clarity of where this comes from. But as we sort of got to know people and we're doing the second round, we always put the whole altar up for Sunday. And then we just kind of, when we were in Auckland for the weekend, we were in a retreat center in the same room the whole time. So we put the whole altar up. We were doing the Kriya, we put the whole altar up. And then just, how do you say that? What does that really mean? We had a lot of, I had to do a lot of thinking about SRF there. Like I said, it didn't really come out in a public way because there were so few people involved. But it was a constant theme behind me. And it's a very confusing and issue, which I bring up to all of you because it's something we all sort of have to come into right relationship with. I think most people are sick of the controversy. I think most SRF members are sick of the controversy. I think everybody just wants to be friends. I don't think there's any question about that. But we're just really, really different. They have such a different way of doing things, and they have this inability to question beyond a certain point. And it became a principle for me, and I'd noticed this before when we were at the convocation in whatever 2000 or 2002, when we were there to present the facts of the lawsuit to the SRF membership and the SRF monastics because they didn't know. And I remember discussing with one of the SRF members, saying something about the lawsuit, and it was a woman. Her response was, well, if the board of directors thinks it's a good idea, it's all right with me. And I pushed it, one more half inch. I said, well, it's being financed with all the money that you're donating. It's millions and millions of your dollars. Maybe you would feel that you have some responsibility to understand this. She says, if the board of directors thinks it's fine, it's all right with me. Now, we were not supposed to argue. And so I just said, well, we're trained differently. And then I just walked away and left it. Now, on one hand, what is more traditional than to say, if those who are in spiritual authority feel that this is a good idea, who am I to question? But it's a very fine line. Another man was talking to me about a completely other path. It wasn't this path at all, but it was similar. Where the guru says, it's a very traditional Indian path he was talking about. The guru says, and he was talking about how the disciples don't have any understanding of what the guru said. They really don't understand what they're being asked to do, but they have to do it. They can sort of think to a certain point, and then they stop. And then I was talking to an SRF member about only monks and nuns can teach. And I was watching this poor man having to make that true, even though he was perfectly qualified to share Master's teachings and desperately wanted to. But he had to make it true. And what I watched was, it just cuts your brain in half, doesn't it? It just takes your intelligence, and you can't use your intelligence. Because at a certain point, you can't keep thinking. Because if you keep thinking, you're going to start doubting, and the dogma has to remain. Very, very fine line. My webinar yesterday was just about the disciples' part, and Master also cautioned against the carping spirit. And he also cautioned against, you can't just take part of the path and then always be picking and choosing. You have to take it with your heart, the whole thing. But honest inquiry and trying to understand why this is true is quite different than feeling that you can't question why it's true. But for some reason, that was the theme, this whole cycle for me. And I think it was partly, let me just try to think this for a moment. I think it was trying to inspire people in the right way with that understanding of their own part and their own freedom, and the same fact that, look, here's a whole line of gurus, and here's a guru, and you can be a disciple, and you can take Kriya, and there's all this that you can do, and just trying to find the place where they'll be able to grow on their own. Because this is a work in that country, if it does take off, which I believe it will, at least, the question, how big, how much, is really in the hands of the people there. But let me just say a couple of other things. I know you had a question, but I'll come back to it. We never had large crowds. I think the largest crowd we ever had was 40. For some of the classes, we had less than 10. And a few places, we had just a couple of people. One city didn't really work very well at all. But I was saying to people, there was no fluff in the room. Sometimes in California, you have your ashram hoppers, or you have your just drifters who kind of have a spiritual attitude, and they come and kind of hang out with you, but they're just there for who knows what. I had one person like that, I think, in all the time that we were there. We did give 3 talks at 3 theosophical societies, And there is a certain person who's attracted to the Theosophical Society who's very much of a intellectual student. But they were intellectual students. They were very interested. But everybody who came, I mean, I'm putting aside the Theosophical members who were just coming to the afternoon lecture because they do, they were really sincere. And they were capable of receiving what we had to give. And that was very unusual. I've never been anywhere where the quality of the room was so good, so that each person was really fully present and contributing. And I think that's why everything just went as well as it did, and why we all felt so solid in the experience. So the way things are left, Kavita's coming out more and is going to combine what she's doing with her yoga, which is basically her bread and butter, with having an Ananda center. She's going to be, more explicit in what she teaches so that it's more clearly this path, no matter how she's introducing people to it. She has a coterie, a few of the 5 people that we initiated into discipleship, or the 4 people that we initiated, 3 of them are there in Hamilton with her. And so it's a really, and there's more than just those, but it's a really solid core of really, really good people. And I'll go back. I'm scheduled to go back in the middle of April. I'm going to take a much shorter trip and not travel as much this time. And I think there's a lot of other Ananda people. I'm going to write, to various likely candidates, because I think it's definitely worth our doing. It's a very refreshing place to visit. So it's not quite like taking a pilgrimage to Hawaii, but there's a little bit of that happening there because it's just such an enjoyable place to visit. The nature there was really something else, especially for me. The trees were what really spoke to me, and it's all the things that it's supposed to be. It's all of those things. When we were coming home from the airport, looking out the window, I sort of looked at Majoni and said, "Where are the green hills and the sheep?" Everywhere we've been looking at green hills and sheep. Thousands and thousands of sheep in all directions. And it was sort of interesting. I said to David after I got home, somehow something about that place captured my heart. It's not, India has me in a different way, but there was something about that place that it's very attractive, and the devotees there are very attractive. And how much Master wants to build there, I don't know, but I certainly think that he has a family, and that we've been able to link them to each other, and link them to Master. So do you have anything to say, dear? You disguised as a little old lady sitting over there.
The magnitude, though, of this journey is just now beginning to unfold in my essence. I had no idea how big this was going to be. And I've taken 3 pilgrimages recently in India and Assisi, and there is nothing like a 6-week journey into the Middle Earth. It was absolutely unbelievable. The countryside is absolutely gorgeous, and it's mile after mile of sheep and cattle and rolling hills and beautiful snow on the mountains. And there's only 4 million people in this huge big island, and so there's no traffic, and there's clean air, and you drink the water. And I by mistake let our water here touch my lips, and I thought, oh my God, I could totally taste the difference. And it was like such a blessing to be there. There were so many lessons. I feel so humble and grateful, and it's very deep. It really takes my breath away.
Can you tell us the story of
being with this one for 6 weeks. I have to tell you another story. Wow. I had no idea the powerful power of of being in the aura of you and your experience. And she gave so much to everybody that was around us that it inspired all of us to do the same. So that was just such a blessing. And there are so many stories. I'm going to try to write some of them, because almost every day, from making breakfast, her New Zealand breakfast, which was fried egg on toast with avocado. That's the New Zealand breakfast, while 8 of us were making breakfast at the same time. And of course, in this tiny kitchen, we did so many dishes that I couldn't even imagine you could do that many dishes in your entire life.
We were 9 people in one house.
In one kitchen. It was a true group home. I mean, big time. and sharing bathrooms and being together, 6 of us, breakfast, lunch, dinner, all day long, everything, morning, noon, night, everything. 6 weeks. Unbelievable. I couldn't even speak when I got home for 3 days. I mean, couldn't even remember the name of my car. I'm a person of habit, and I left with a lot of habits, and I didn't get to have any of them when I was there. So I came home and I couldn't remember my habits. It was like, oh my God. Oh my God, I've been taking 3 days to remember my habits. Oh, it's terrible. And then today, my shower curtain fell down, and I thought, now who does this? I could not stand up there and do it. I looked out my window, and there was Tom. I said, Tom! Tom, could you come up here, please? And he came, bless your heart, bless your heart. I mean, I just cannot even think yet. But I don't know, one of the greatest stories besides coming down and having Asha announce that I was leaving at the breakfast table, and there was just...
you have to understand. Her name changed the first night we were there.
Right,
And
the
so
first night.
I was so naughty. I was really, really naughty. Because the next morning I had to tell everyone, so I got everyone at the breakfast table, and and it worked so much better than I expected. I said, I have an announcement to make. I'm sorry to tell you that Jill's not going to be continuing with us.
And I didn't know either, and I'm going...
I didn't know that you didn't know. They all got so sad. But I just left them
Thank
being
God.
sad for really much longer than I should. But then we said, but Jyoti's going to continue.
Yeah. That was really, really wonderful. I mean, I cried all day on that one. To get a name at such an auspicious moment in time, it felt really, really good. Yeah, it was really wonderful. I think the biggest lesson I learned, and I'll leave the others, was flexibility and how to say yes to everything. Everything. She says yes to everything, and then maybe makes adjustments. But yes comes first. For instance, we had the Marshmallow, right? A 12-passenger van. We were going on a 2-week journey, our first road trip. So it wasn't about taking a little overnight bag. We had to take all the bags. Plus we had like 7, 8 books, boxes of books, plus the guitar, the harmonium, flowers, vases, all the gear for the altar and for doing Kriya and for everything, and all of the bags. And we come out in the morning, and Arun, who loves to sell things on the internet, had sold the lilies. And we got out there, and there were stacks of lilies like this. And he says, I'd like you to drop them off at Taupo for us on your way. It's only 2 hours from here. You can do it. I looked at that. I said, there's no way. There's no way we can go. We can't go. Plus the 6 people and all that. And dirt, and it was dirty and awful.
He pulled them all out of the ground. They were
Just the dirt, just raw roots, everything going, And I mean, it's just the worst. And Arun, his heart was being broken, really, because not only was he losing his wife for the 2 or 3 weeks we were going to be gone, but he really wanted this deal. So Asha says, well, we can do it. Just stand back. You stand back. I've done this. I've put much more of this in this. We have plenty of room. Plenty of room. And I'm saying, there's no way. There is no way. I've packed cars too. She gets them all in the front seat, stacked up like this, and gets everything in, and it's all in. There's plenty of room for all of us. And I get in there and I say, wow. I said, you know what? There really is some room from here to the top of the car. I said, you're right. There is plenty of room. We could all put a bag on our heads and hold it while we go. And we could have. She was right. I never doubted it another time. I just, whatever she said, whatever, it always worked, everything. I mean, we did Korea in the most unusual places and met people in the most unusual places and created beauty and spirit and sacredness like those people had never experienced before. There was one girl who fell in love with us at one of the retreats in Auckland, and then she invited us to her house for the Diwali. That's the Diwali picture you saw. Well, she sent an email to Asha and says, I'd love for you to come over for dinner and have and see my home and bless my home or something like that. And so I thought, oh, it's pouring down rain. We can't go. It's just too much trouble. Oh, no. Pack everything up, all the stuff, everything to make a little thing, the blessing, the cards, and everything. And we go with the harmonium and the guitar in the rain. And we get to her house, and it's about this big. And we all sit in there like this, right? And it was the most beautiful, mind-blowing, exceptional experience of my life. It was so beautiful. It was, all of us were just blown away by it. Of course, and the young lady was so happy too. And walking through her house like we do with our blessing and everything. And it was so wonderful. And we just did that time after time after time. The people are so wonderful there. It's like New Zealand is like a big Ananda community already. So if any of you get to go, I just know it will be a moment of meeting friends that have been your friends forever, always. It felt like that in our last retreat in Taupo, where we had probably 35 of us that were there. And I felt like we had gone on the journey for this group of people, that these were the ones we came to meet. And as it turned out, then the 5 disciples came in, and then the one taking Kriya, and the rest are, I think, going to be the anchors of the entire journey in New Zealand. I really do. Beautiful hearts, wonderful people, and so spiritual already. I mean, really, really with it, able to understand. And by the way, today, in 1927, Yogananda spoke in Minneapolis at the Theosophical Society. They're trippy, the Theosophical Society people. But we slept everywhere. Dunbar and I especially. We one time he got to sleep in the kitchen and I slept in the dining room, and so we really, really experienced a lot of fun moments, And we made it.
You know what Atmajoti said about the people being spiritual there? From the very first, it was very interesting. From the very first meditation, the meditations were exceptionally still. I mean, not a sound, and not even just that people sat still, but there was a kind of mental quiet. It was very notable. We all noticed it. Just, I mean, from like the first one, let's have a moment of silence. Boom, the room just went utterly still. And every time we meditated, no matter where we were, there was that same feeling. Swamiji had talked about the effect of the Maori culture, the residual effect of the Maori culture on the New Zealanders. He said that New Zealanders are inclined to psychic experiences and have a greater attunement with the non-physical world. I don't know if that's what we were experiencing or not. I'm not really sure. Anyway, we have a new family. And a lot of New Zealanders travel. I like 90% of the New Zealanders have passports because, you know, you're there, and to get anywhere, you have to go somewhere else. And a lot of them come to the U.S. regularly. The Auckland-San Francisco flight is a 12-hour nonstop flight. It's effortless. So I think a lot of the people are going to be parading through here. And, of course, they'll come by the 3 of us. Yeah. And anyone who, you know, is taking a holiday or just wants to go, we have friends, and they're very hospitable people. I mean, it's true. They would just love to have friends. And so I've been sort of holding it a little at bay. I was asking people, please don't make any plans until I've gone for the first time. But we'd like to just create a schedule of folks just coming in and out, because I think we could make a lot happen there and just have a lot of fun. You know, it's really, there are people. I was laughing with that whole business with packing the truck the very first day. It really was. It was God inspired, because it did change the dynamic. Because there was this, Brian was fine, Dambara was willing, Rachel was very skeptical. Rachel and Atmajoti were utterly convinced there was no room. And afterwards I said, you know, if you haven't had experience, you don't know. I said, you don't know what full is. Full is when you put the people in and then you pile the book boxes on their lap. And sometimes they're higher than their eyes. That's full. This was not full. We each had our own seat. There was nothing special. But it was actually fun to say yes first. Yes, Karen.
I was just going to say, for anybody who has ever watched Swami in action, that yes saying idea, for you guys to have the opportunity to be in her vibe where yes was the only option, it actually is really, it's so expansive and frightening. Frightening. I just wanted to
Swamiji with us.
Here, just because all of us need to be in that frame of reference more often, but that you guys had 6 weeks of it is such a blessing.
Yeah, you have to, and you had to say yes. There was no, when that business with the plants was really, it was our first outing. Everybody was a little, I wasn't even tuned in to anybody. This is just like, you know, we're off on the road, just a normal thing. And Rachel walks in and starts to say to Arun, you don't understand, we don't have room. I just grabbed her. I mean, this is the husband of our host. We are going to do what he asks us to do. I said, Rachel, if we have to leave our own luggage here, we are taking these plants. So I just grabbed her and took her out of the room. And immediately, because Brian and I are very in tune, I'm pulling Rachel out of the room and I'm just shouting, Brian, Brian, Brian! I didn't know where he was. And I pointed to all this stuff. I said, Brian, it's all going in. He just says, sure. It's just experience. Next time you'll be the one. Sure. And of course you have to say yes to anything anybody asks you. You know, no matter how obscure the person or how obscure the request, which none of these really were, that's what you're there for. You know, you've come all this distance and somebody wants even the smallest thing from you. The only answer is yes. Because you never know. You never know where the door's going to open. You never know where it's going to lead. You just can't tell. And you can't, when you're meeting people for the first time, you don't know who you're talking to. I mean, you can have, you know, this is where intuition comes in. There's a certain intuition that is valid, and some of it is just, you know, personality affinity or superficial something or another, and some of it is deep, and you're just not really quite sure. I'm not quite sure. So you just keep saying yes and just see where it'll take you. And we did end, I'm glad you brought that up. Kavita had the idea from the start that the third weekend, the last weekend, the 6th or 5th weekend, would be this retreat at Lake Taupo. Taupo is this very huge lake that was one, volcanic explosion some thousands of years ago. It's very, very big, bigger than Lake Tahoe, I think. And, just gorgeous. So there's this retreat, and as it happens, it's where the SRF group has their retreat. The members of SRF, without the monks, once a year would gather to have a meditation weekend, and they almost always had it at Taupo. So it was a beautiful retreat facility, and the weather was so unpredictable. The New Zealand weather in spring is just I think the weather is always a wild card, but especially in spring. You wake up, it's beautiful sun. By the time you finished your meditation, it's raining. Then you go down to breakfast and it's sun again, then the cold wind comes up, and it's just marvelous. But and whenever we needed good weather, we had it. The 2 days at Lake Taupo, perfect sunshine. And just as Atmajoti said, it was like everybody who was really going to be part of the story was there. So we had a really, really marvelous time, and really felt at the end of that we'd found each other. Yeah, in a very
We had one fellow who's a doctor, psychologist?
Psychiatrist,
Alan. He bought every single book that we brought. I mean, do you know what that feels like? To have someone want to be on the path that bad.
Yeah, he's a very
I
dear
mean,
man. He's
within that period of time that we were there.
Yeah.
He went everywhere with us. He just would follow us wherever we would go, and it was just such a wonderful thing.
He's from Scotland.
Yeah.
He and Brian were soulmates. They were both from the United Kingdom, and neither of them liked the British. He'll undoubtedly show up here. He travels in the U.S. Easily and regularly, so
Such a great guy.
he may be the first one who shows up on our shores.
I think he'll be a leader too.
I got so accustomed to being there. This was the funniest moment for me. We made a big circle at the retreat a couple of times, just so everybody could see everybody. And people were speaking, and there was somebody with a super Kiwi accent, But by this point, I was really attuned to it. But it was so thick, I started to reinterpret it into English. And then I realized that they all could understand it perfectly well. But I had become so sort of comfortable, I was going to be the one who would translate. Hamilton is where Kavita is, and that's where we're going to build. It's a smaller city. Wellington, I think, was the city I liked the most. Wellington, they call it the little San Francisco. They consider Wellington to be San Francisco and Auckland to be Los Angeles. Auckland is huge and spread out, and Wellington is built right on the water and built on the hills. And we had small classes in Wellington, but there was just something about the energy there that really felt very, very good to me. Brian, Rose, and Linda. Brian has been a long-time disciple also, and Linda. They live in a suburb of Wellington, about 20 minutes out of town. But he works in Wellington, and everybody goes in. So I think in May I probably won't go to Wellington, but I think we should. I think we could really make something happen there. It just has the right vibe.
How many people in Hamilton?
Whoa, those are questions that I can never answer. I can say 4 million in the country, and I have no idea.
All right.
I'm just not... if Brian were here, he would look it up on Google.
Well, it's in the middle of the country of North Island. Hamilton is, so people can come from Auckland and they can come up. Well, maybe not.
But it's actually, people travel. It's so easy to travel. The roads are excellent and the traffic is low, so people can move really easily. So when I go in May, I think we're just going to stay in Hamilton. So I'll be in Hamilton. I'm going to go for 2 weeks and 3 weekends. So we'll do 2 weekends in Hamilton in 10 days, and then we'll go probably to Taupo or to a place like it, and then people from all the other cities can come. People make a comfortable living in New Zealand. It's rather socialistic, and the minimum wage is high. There's no real low wage earners there, and there are economic differences, but the bottom is pretty high, and people have money to spend, and they're very a little more home-oriented. Restaurants are closed on Sunday afternoons because most people stay home. And it's just a different feeling.
Shops close at 4.
And shops close in the early afternoon. It's just not the same world that we live in. I found that very relaxing. People are a little less
I was
frantic.
wondering if that's not part of the reason why people get so still. There's just not this buzz of electronics, and they're out with sheep.
No, everybody. No, believe me, everybody's
No,
got
no,
their
you
cell
know
phone.
what I
But
mean. Here
no,
it's so
it's exactly.
buzzed.
I was very conscious of the energy here. But of course, now Rachel, I'll tell you, Rachel, was in the fashion world. She was a makeup artist for movies and fashion, and she's very, very into fashion and so on. She made an interesting comment. They had a layover. They flew through Australia to get to New Zealand, and they had a number of hours a layover on the way in. And Rachel, in her way, she goes around, she looks at clothes and fashion and all of this, and there's very fashion-forward shops in Australia. Australia's a presence in the fashion world. And in New Zealand, she said there was just almost nothing to look at in that respect, because the country's not trying to make it in the big world. They're just contented where they are. That's the good news, and that's also the limiting factor. So both are true. They're not innovating and moving like that, but at the same time, it also creates a certain. What I came to the phrase, and I put it in my letter. It's energetic, but it's relaxed. I realized it's a perfect place for sadhana. I really thought this is a perfect place for a retreat, because it's not sleepy, but it's not frantic either. So and all that nature just holds you in a really beautiful. We did the channel song over and over and over. Dambara was wonderful. Dambara was wonderful too. Not just his heart and his spirit, but his music was just amazing. Was nothing like it. And he really got very, very good. He's so, he's just so giving. He's just so naturally giving. He just stands up and just starts giving out. And then he opens his mouth. He's like an angel. Just in any circumstance. I had this strange idea when we were just singing the blessing. We were not, the rest of us, a particularly musical group for Ananda. To have that many people and have there be such a disparity between him and the rest of us. I mean, none of us were really singers. Brian is better. I mean, we're all okay. But Dambara was just a lot better. But we were singing the blessing, and this thought crossed my mind. When he's all alone by himself, does he still sing that well? It's just strange what your mind does, doesn't it? But anyway. We also met, I should just say, Kavita has 2 daughters. Devya is 14 and Veda is 16. Lovely, lovely girls, and Arun is her husband, and they just let us take over their home and their family, and they were marvelous. Girls are very, very dear. Arun is very wonderful. He was always making the lamb beautiful, and the girls were always cooking. They made desserts for us every night. Every night.
So good.
We all came home a little bigger, but very happy. And then in Wellington, Brian Rose and his wife Linda, they also had a spacious home, and we were all managed to stay in there. Dambara did have to have a corner of the family room, and we had to convert we had to convert the dining room into a bedroom for Atmajoti, but still we were all together, and that really made it work. It was worth it to us. Marie, one of the stalwarts of Hamilton, Marie is a singer. She's part of a Sweet Adeline's group. I mean, she's a real singer, and so it's all there to happen.
Yeah.
It's all in place to happen. So that's the end of the story, unless there's any other questions or thoughts or anything.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.